What is the drug war, the war on drugs as we talk? What is it?
Yeah, so if you look at drug trafficking in the modern sense, okay, it goes actually all the way back to 1914. You had a thing in the US called the Harrison's Narcotic Tax Act, where they started taxing like some and regulating and prohibiting some opium and cocaine back then in 1914, 1915 it came into effect.
Because prior to this, you could just buy it and
Yeah,
it's normal.
I mean, there was some like local measures came in. But like very early on then, from like 1915, when it started to really be like more national kind of drug prohibition or kind of regulation, you had a drug trade from Mexico to the United States. So there's a case you can look at going back to 1916 of cases of people trafficking drugs from Mexico to the United States. Initially, it was often Chinese immigrants to Mexico. Obviously, we had the Opium War. You know, us Brits forced the selling of opium in China. The habits continued. People moved to Mexico, started planting opium in Mexico and trafficking it to Chinese Americans. Some of the very first cases you can see in 1916. And right back then, there was Mexican governors involved in the corruption. So you saw this kind of thing. Then the real war on drugs happens under Richard Nixon. The date is generally seen as being in 1971, when President Richard Nixon had this press conference where he said, public enemy number one in the United States is illegal drugs. And he had, we're going to fight a war against them, a war on drugs. And he talked in very absolutist terms in those days. It was like, we will have an abolition of drugs from American life. Like there will be no heroin. Middle-class parents, don't worry about your kids taking heroin. It's not going to happen. There will be no heroin available. And that was 1971. Then you saw this escalation, the drug trade in Colombia really kicking off, the violence in Colombia, Escobar, cocaine, and drug habits in the United States really, really increasing, drug consumption. Reagan amped it up. And then you've had this since then. Now, I argue now, that really we've got a zombie war on drugs now, because that we've had 50 years, it's been a failure. We've now had last year record overdose deaths in the United States. The level of violence in Latin America has been, in the last 20 years, there's been more than 2 million homicides in Latin America, more than 2 million murders. So the level of violence now, a lot of this, when you see it on the ground, is more actually like an armed conflict you're covering. I mean, these are heavily armed groups. Military crackdowns by governments. So you've seen a lot more death there than most of the Middle East. And a large amount is related to cocaine trade. Not obviously not all the murders, but that's a large factor in this violence there. But there isn't really any more the impetus, the kind of real energy of people about let's try and stop drugs being in people's lives. They kind of accept and live with drugs now. But we still have this kind of prohibition stumbling on elements and this kind of enforcement and so forth.